This 1988 Bertone has a little bit of an oil leak. The first thing I notice is the sump plug has been changed and repaired, and there's oil across the sump as well. Besides all the oil you can see, the sump gasket is also bulging out. There's also a fair amount of oil coming from the gearbox side of the sump. To start, I'm going to drain the oil, then using a jack to support the engine. Now to undo these two bolts that support the exhaust system. I'll go into more detail later, but this is only found on the Bertone model. And now detaching the mount from the gearbox, it's held in place in 3 places. I'm disconnecting the shifter linkage so I can get better access to the bolts that hold in the lower support. With the gearbox supported, I can now remove the lower mount. It's only held in place with 4 bolts. With everything now disconnected, I can now wiggle out the lower mount. Now to remove this plate which covers the flywheel, it's only held in place with 1 bolt. Now with everything exposed, I can see the oil's coming from this direction, and there's also a bolt missing from the sump. In order to get better access to the sump, I'm going to remove this plastic side cover. It's only held in place with a few screws. So now just to wiggle it out of the way. Now to undo all the bolts that hold the sump in place. And now just to slip off the sump, it's getting stuck there on the oil pickup. The engine in an X19 is installed at a slight angle, and the oil pickup horn is level to the ground. If you buy a 128 pump, the horn is actually at a slightly different angle. I'm not sure what angle it's on, but it's definitely not flat. So now to remove this old crusty rubber seal. The old rubber gasket had some kind of compound on it, so I'm using some Scotch-Brite to clean it off. The old rubber gasket is hard and cracking, and it's left some residue on the sump itself. As the sump is made of aluminium, I'm going to use a plastic scraper. If I use a metal one, it will gouge the metal. Now to use a lot of elbow grease to get this gunk off. I'm removing the oil baffle to get better access for cleaning and making sure that the sump is level. With closer inspection, I can see there are some gouges in the metal. I'm using this flat stone to get rid of any tiny bumps. So now just to reinstall the tray. I have 2 gaskets to choose from, the first one being a paper one, and that measures at 0.86 of a mil, and the rubber one which measures at 3.15. I've chosen to use a paper gasket this time. I believe I got it pretty flat and it's really quite clean, so I'm just going to oil it up and stick it on. The oil pickup has some crusty gooey bits on the mesh. I'm removing the bottom horn part so I can clean the rest of that out. Using a screwdriver to pry the metal, I can get the mesh off. On the mesh part, it felt like there was hard plastic bits, and then on the tray part it was bits of rubber. So I gave it a good clean, and now just to reassemble it. With the pump torqued up, I'm putting the oil pan back on. Now to put all the bolts back in, but only loosely. And then to torque it on with a crisscross pattern. Put some plumber's tape on the sump plug and then screwed it back in. And now to install the lower plate covering the flywheel. This is the lower mount on the car, and this part here fits inside. This piece that comes off the end there is for the exhaust to hang onto. In Australia, you'll only find this mount on the Series 3 Bertone model. All the Fiat models had this type, and it fits in the same place. There are some bolt-on kits you can buy that convert it to the same type. I'll leave a link in the description below. The bottom mount here is for a 5-speed and the top mount is for a 4-speed. This measures in at about 21mm and the top one at about 16.5. And when you put them on top of each other like this, you can see how much more rubber there is. The reason they're different is for weight and CV joint size. When you buy these new, there's rubber on the end. so I just cut it off so I get metal to metal contact. Installing the lower mount, bolts and washers. And then to torque them up to factory specification, except this one is just spinning. So off came the bottom mount, and then I had to re-thread it at a slightly larger size. Now to reinstall the lower mount once again and screw it in place. Then attach the lower mounting bracket for the exhaust. And then once again torque everything up to specification. These were missing on the car, but I had these spares. They go over the bolt, so it stops it spinning. Now to remove the jack and let the engine sit on the mount. With everything looking good, I'm just going to reattach the shifter linkage and put this cover back in place. All that's left to do is put some oil in it and then take it for a test drive. So after my test drive, unfortunately I do see some oil, but I don't think it's coming from the sump gasket. If you look at the timing belt cover, there's a drop of oil on the bottom there. Possibly one of those seals is leaking. So now on the flywheel side, I don't see any oil, so that looks like it may have fixed the problem. For more videos, information and club day events, visit our website at x19.com.au or fiatclub.net.au. While you're visiting the website, click on the link to join our Facebook group or follow our Instagram feeds. And once again, thanks for watching.